Last week, I brought you the news from the European parliamentary elections. What looked like good news: 373 nominally Conservative or centre-right MEPs elected to the European Parliament, giving them a clear majority for the first time. But of course, that wasn't counting on the deep state that is the European Commission, the bureaucracy that really runs the joint. They've been fighting back and they have taken control once again of the European agenda, leaving the centre-right as the permanent opposition, I guess. I spoke this week to Alvino Mario Fantini, who's the editor-in-chief of the European Conservative, somebody who's been following this dismal story about European politics for some time. No, you're more of a seasoned watcher of European politics than I. You know that the European Parliament doesn't work as a normal parliament. So just because you've got on paper 373, I think I counted, people who are nominally Conservative or reasonably Conservative, doesn't mean to say you've got a majority.
It means very little to me, actually, to be perfectly frank. First of all, I think many of those so-called conservatives aren't really conservative. For example, people within the European People's Party, the big parliamentary grouping, are said to be conservative, yet when you look at some of their policies, they're on the far left, in my opinion. Secondly, I think a lot of those people who have been elected as conservatives, as I said in comments recently, once in power, once elected, they suddenly discard their principles and suddenly move to the center. Now, people always say, well, one thing is to campaign as a conservative, but once you're in government, you need to shift your positions. And I say no, you need to remain faithful to those principles that got you elected in the first place.
So basically, you once again, it shows how tightly held the European Union is by the bureaucracy, I guess, who run it.
By the bureaucracy, or the terms I prefer to use are the deep state or the administrative state, because it's not just in the U.S. that you have that phenomenon. It's worldwide, and particularly here in Europe, where you have centuries of basically state-led development and state-led policies, and the state, in the Hegelian sense of the state forging and building countries. You have that coalition of private and public power, but within the public sector, what you have is the coming together of all these various entities, agencies, departments, divisions into this morass of power and self-perpetuating power. And I think that is the greatest threat to basically the rest of us, the people, or as a friend of mine put it, the working people of this world that do all the cleaning, living, and then dying, and that disappear without anyone ever celebrating them and their sacrifices. What you see and what you hear about is only those in power. So that's a long-winded answer to your question.
Well, it's a very important answer. I mean, the European Union, the European Parliament, you can understand it in a way. It was set up in a way that would favour the bureaucracy.
Oh, absolutely.
We never had any chance.
Absolutely.
But if you go to the United States, if you go to Australia, if you go to Britain, these are democracies. It seems to me we're almost willingly giving power to those people. And you know, COVID was the big eye-opener for me in America when you see how enormously powerful an official like Fauci is and others. You know, they even, you know, the president ends up struggling to sort of gain traction.
Right, well, and especially in reference to the Anglosphere, the Anglo-American countries, how did we get here? What happened in this tradition of Anglo-American liberty that was once so valuable, so cherished, so well defended, and then fast forward to today, or as you said, to the COVID period, what happened? What steps were taken in the 20th century that allowed this monstrosity, again, the administrative state, the deep state in these Anglo-American countries, to basically take over our lives? I see, of course, in the United States context, a series of steps. You have the Great Society programs, but before that, you have the progressive era in the early part of the 20th century. And it's a very interesting era because you start reading documents from presidents like Wilson or FDR later, where they're basically saying, we who were educated at Harvard and know more than everybody else know how society should be run. We know what is best for the rest of you. And that's where you get that elitism. And then it gets institutionalized with these multilaterals, the UN and the IMF and the World Bank, and then you get to today. So it's this long pattern of steps that were taken in the 20th century that has led to this moment.
In America, you see, you fight so hard for democracy overseas, right? You put so much blood, sweat and tears and money into trying to turn Iraq, for instance, into a democracy. But your own democracy, you're a bit careless, it seems to me, as is Australia and Britain, about maintaining those institutions and the importance of democratic accountability.
Absolutely. And the height of irony is to listen to people today say Trump is the greatest threat to democracy in our history. That's nonsense, or as the Brits say, poppycock. Because I think Trump is on the side of the working class, the working class that has been ignored for so long. And again, another irony, the working class that was or used to be represented by the Democratic Party. And yet today the Democratic Party is the party of the very wealthy and the corporations.
Yeah, so as Conservatives, it seems to me we need to sort of be on the side of giving power back to people so that they can actually vote for people into parliaments in positions of authority, knowing that they will be held accountable. They don't want them, they can unelect them.
I agree completely. And in fact, this is why I defend so vociferously sometimes the populist revolt that we're seeing emerge in different countries at different times, especially since 2016 with Brexit and Trump. I think that populist rebellion, whether it's right or left, I'm supportive of it. I think it's an attempt to push back the state, which has been growing, as I've said earlier, and an attempt to put people back at the center of policies. That's where they should be. They're the ones who should be the focus of all public policies. And I should add, public policies, most of them are not set up to help people. They're set up to satisfy some kind of narrow special interest in Congress or in Parliament.
Yeah, to get back to that wonderful picture of democracy that de Tocqueville paints in America in the early 19th century, that, yeah, I mean, he says politicians that democracies throw up are often very poor and they let us down. But the important thing is they cannot depart from the public will for very long.
Right, that's true. But I'm very happy that you mentioned Tocqueville, because there's another part in his wonderful study of the United States where he talks about the voluntary associations and their role and their importance, and how fascinated he was, because that didn't exist in Europe. Well, those voluntary associations have also now shriveled up in the United States and in other countries where they existed because, again, of the growing power of the government taking over. So every step that has been taken over the 20th century to expand the power of government has basically eroded the power of these voluntary associations. The best example is our health insurance system. There used to be a patchwork or a quilt of different medical providers and insurance schemes, mostly built around fraternal organizations or the church. And most of those have evaporated because what did the federal government do little by little is start taking over, start imposing regulations, start imposing requirements. And in the mistaken idea that the whole federal government should provide to every single person one similar health insurance scheme, when the reality is different communities and different pockets of people are dramatically different and have different medical needs. You're unable to respond to those unique, particular local needs if you have one generic system managed from Washington.
Well, I must say you talk a lot of common sense, Mario, which probably makes you unpopular in the halls of power.
It makes me unpopular at home with my father and mother, I should say. They don't like what I say.
But we should just give a plug to European Conservative, your magazine, the magazine which you were really largely responsible for building up. For more of this kind of commentary and ideas, European Conservative is an excellent publication, and
thank you.
Maybe it should become World Conservative and bring in Australia as well.
I'm glad you said that. I've been toying with that idea, maybe the Global Conservative. Of course, there are many, many different kinds of conservatives, right? And perhaps it should be the Global Conservatives, plural. But thank you for mentioning that. And for anyone listening or watching, you can go to EuropeanConservative.com for much of our content. We publish daily news on that website, and we also have that quarterly journal. Some of that material appears on the website, but the quarterly journal is really a work of art, I'm proud to say. The team that works on it is fantastic, and it really is an effort to reintegrate all the things that the left and modernity has fragmented: art, philosophy, beauty, goodness, truth, and politics.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Manuel.
Thank you.
Thank you.